everyone knows English West Midlands and Birmingham as the birthplace of heavy metal. But why is it so? I mean, with all due respect, there were a lot of other industrial areas around the world back then.
Why?
So today, let's discuss why heavy metal actually could not have been formalized anywhere outside of West Midlands back in the late 60s, and why steel factories were by far not the only element to it, and then talk about what it may actually mean for the future of heavy metal in post-industrial world of 2026. Here you go. As always, super quick guys, please do not hesitate to comment on anything you hear or see in this video, and especially if you disagree with me, because the whole point of our Metal Pilgrim channel is of course to start a conversation. But alright, let's do it. When it comes to West Midlands, and specifically Birmingham of the late 60s, the smoke, the sound of hammers pounding steel, the grime, the grit, it was all in the air. Literally, you could smell metal, taste metal, and breathe metal. Believe me. I mean, I was actually born in a Ukrainian equivalent of Birmingham, and I still can remember the sound of the factories and that smell anytime I close my eyes. But when it comes to West Midlands specifically, it was the industrial heart of the United Kingdom. And it is no surprise that out of that darkness came the hardest and the heaviest music the world has ever heard. Rob Halford once said that metal is synonymous with the Midlands. As a kid, his school sat right next to a metal factory, and during English class he'd hear machinery pounding through the walls. Glenn Tipton remembers the same. There was always a steel mill within audible distance, he said. Wherever in the city you've been, you could always hear the steam hammers. And that wasn't really a metaphor. I mean, it was really their daily life that shaped those people.
This beautiful marriage between the heavy metal industry, coal mines, steel factories, the metal works, all of these amazing places where people work really hard. There was something of a renaissance and a social revolution going on from when I was born in 1951, particularly through the 60s. And included in that revolution was the way that music was getting louder and stronger and more intense.
So I guess it's no surprise that that area became a home for pretty tough people. As Deep Purple John Lord, who himself was from Leicester, recollected, Midlanders were people with a cigarette in the corner of their mouth and a dark look in their eyes, which, in my opinion, by the way, is a perfect description of a hard-working class and pretty much any industrialized economy. And the truth is that it is that working class mentality and attitude that eventually ran into the core of heavy metal music. As Deep Purple's Ian Gillan once said, if you're born in Mecca, you're unlikely to grow up Catholic. And of course, same went for the Midlands youth, for whom growing up there meant a factory life, cold mornings, long shifts, and steel mills roaring before sunrise, with pretty much every heavy metal hero from that area actually having to live it to the fullest. And even somebody like Glenn Tipton himself actually had to wake up and have an early 7 a.m. shift at a factory just to be able to sustain his life. But the truth is that English youth wanted change, and it just happens to be so that rock and roll, and later heavy metal, became a window to an absolutely different life for many of those. But while music of course can be an outlet for many young people around the world, if you're coming from an industrial area like West Midlands, I mean, that outlet could actually look slightly different. Just as Diamond Head's Brian Tetler said, it was an escape for many of his peers. And since you simply had no opportunity to go to a sunny beach with an acoustic guitar and play happy music, well, you kinda had to translate your mood and your feelings into fuzzy guitar sounds. And by the way guys, here I just want to point out that if you like to nerd out about heavy metal as much as I do, and especially if this is not the first video you're watching on this channel and you're still not subscribed to it, I would really appreciate it if you would consider subscribing right now. Let's continue building this amazing heavy metal community together. And thus, of course, the area has given us some of the biggest names in the history of heavy metal music, with the most obvious ones, of course, being Black Sabbath and Judas Priest. And we all know that Black Sabbath's connection to Birmingham is not just symbolic, I mean, it's literal. Tony Iommi, just like Glenn Tipton, actually worked at a metal factory before the band took off. And we all know that the accident that cost him the tips of his fingers ended up shaping the very sound of metal.
As I'm pushing the metal through into this machine, it just came down like that on my finger. Bang! And I pulled my hand back. And as I pulled it back, I pulled the ends off the fingers.
And those two bands, of course, weren't alone. West Midlands has produced a long list of legendary artists: the Moody Blues, Diamond Head, Blaze Bayley, Electric Light Orchestra, British death metal grunts Napalm Death, Benediction and Bull Thrower, funeral doom death metal fathers Esoteric, and even Led Zeppelin's Robert Plant and John Bonham were just up the road. A whole spectrum of rock and metal history came from that one industrial zone in England. And the craziest thing is that many of them to this very day speak very warmly of their hometowns. We all know that all of the boys from Birmingham are very proud of their roots, with many even comparing Black Sabbath's role to the city's history to what the Beatles are to Liverpool. And just the whole fact that last year the 4 original members of Black Sabbath were able to come back home and celebrate their legacy and the legacy of Birmingham was simply a gift to all the fans around the world. And in addition to that, we all know how proud Judas Priest are for being from Black Country. John Bonham, for example, felt truly at home playing in local bands before Zeppelin took off, and said that Birmingham's scene and his family life grounded him in a way the fame never did. Blaze Bayley has called Birmingham a cradle of metal, pointing directly to the city's factories and working class culture as the reason he gravitated towards heavier, grittier music. And even on the heavier spectrum, Des Brooks from Benediction also said that it was the bands and the legacy of West Midlands metal, particularly Judas Priest and Black Sabbath, that did not only shape the landscape of heavy metal, but inspired many generations to come. And that list, of course, can go on and on and on. But why is it so? Is it really something in the air there? Well, here's where it actually becomes interesting. People like to say that heavy metal was born in West Midlands specifically because of the factories. And sure, that was an important part of it, but let's be honest here, there are plenty of industrial cities and areas around the world. Detroit, the Ruhr region, parts of northern France, and the Soviet Union, in which I was born, once again in a very factory-rich city. And all of them had heavy industry, smoke-filled skies, and workers grinding away in plants. But none of them gave us Black Sabbath and Judas Priest, and none of those created a genre of music. So why the Midlands? Well, in my opinion, it was actually a combination of 4 very unique factors, and one of them is, of course, industrialization. But let's not forget that by the late 60s, those factories weren't symbols of success anymore. Quite the opposite. They were symbols of disappointment. The promises of a better future had already started to fall apart. Manufacturing was declining and wages were stagnant. People weren't just surrounded by metal, they were trapped in it. And that shift from industrial optimism to post-industrial disillusionment has actually given that music its bite. Number 2 is the timing that mattered just as much as the place. This wasn't the 1930s and the rise of industrialization. This was the end of the 1960s, the tail end of the hippie era, and the start of something much darker. You had young people who were already done with flower power, already jaded by the world around them, and completely disconnected from any notion of utopia. And that frustration paired with conflicts around the world and global distress did need its own soundtrack. Number 3 is the local scene. Birmingham and the broader West Midlands had a strong culture of local gigs and weekend shows. Working class kids going to see bands not in stadiums, but in pubs, clubs, and community halls. And back then it wasn't only about industry backing or fame, it was about expression, energy, and noise. Bands could form, evolve, and be heard, and that kind of grassroots infrastructure gave metal the chance to actually grow. And the truth is that back in the 1960s, that wasn't really all that common around Europe, and even at some parts of the United States yet. Which brings us to the 4th point, and this is something that many people for some weird reason ignore. It happened in the United Kingdom, not behind the Iron Curtain, not in the place where dissent was shut down and censored. Britain, with all its problems, was still an open society. I mean, at the very least, you could pick up a guitar, write a song about whatever the flip you wanted, including screaming about war, disillusionment, drugs, corruption, and depression, and no one would at the very least arrest you for it. Unlike, for example, in the USSR, where even in the 1980s you could literally go to jail for possessing a metal cassette tape.
Well, we're boned.
And that freedom made punk possible, made rock possible, and made metal inevitable. So yes, only when you add all of this together, the industrial roots, the specific moment in time, the strength of the local scene, and the freedom to actually say something, you end up with the only place on the planet, back in the day, where heavy metal could have been born. Not just as a genre inspired by industrialization, but as the one that actually, deep inside, rebelled against it. And the craziest thing is that, well, back in the day, West Midlands and Birmingham gave its sons and daughters everything it could, in its weird and twisted form, to create the music that we all love today. And today, when many of those factories are standing still, well, those sons and daughters are actually giving their homeland something back. The worldwide fame of being the birthplace of the greatest music on the planet. And this, my friends, does count for something. And if you think about it, in a weird form, but this actually does give us a little bit of hope that amidst the craziest of times that we all as a planet are going through right now, and especially in places like where I personally live, amidst all this turmoil, we'll finally get something that, in my opinion, we have not really seen in a metal scene for a very long time. A true birth of something worthy and absolutely new. Because as grim as it may sound, but it is amidst such pivotal times in human history, the humanity is actually also at its most creative point. So who knows, maybe the new Black Sabbath or Judas Priest is actually just around the corner. But anyways, what do you guys personally think about why it was West Midlands and Birmingham that eventually became the birthplace of heavy metal? Please let us know in the comments. And I really hope that I didn't bore you to death with this essay-like type of a video. So thank you so much for watching, guys, and we will prevail. Slava Ukraini!